Have you ever woken in the middle of the night, heart pounding, mind racing through 1,000 half-formed thoughts, only to realize you can't name the source of your unrest? It's as if something deep inside you is stirring, whispering that life isn't unfolding the way it ought to, yet no matter how many self-help articles you devour or how many times you promise yourself, this time will be different, the knot in your chest refuses to untie. If I'm honest, that sensation, this quiet desperation, is what brought me here. And I know it brought you here too. You've learned to live with the questioning gaze in the mirror, the tiny voice that asks, "Am I doing this right?" You replay conversations in your mind, dissect every choice as though your life depended on perfect decisions. You blame yourself for every misstep, as if each small failure means you're fundamentally flawed. But let me say this plainly, that gut-wrenching self-doubt isn't a sign of weakness. It's a signal that parts of you are starving for truth, for a way to breathe without judgment. Day after day, you impose on yourself the invisible rule book of being good and aware. You've read the latest bestseller on mindfulness, you've scrolled through those inspirational quotes promising transformation, and yet the more you chase after feeling enlightened, the heavier the chains of expectation become. You feel exhausted from the relentless pursuit of perfection, tired of hearing, as though on loop, just think positive, be more present, or you're capable of anything if you believe hard enough. Those mantras sound hollow now, don't they? Inside you, two voices wage a silent war. One snarls, "You're a failure. Why even try?" It drapes your shoulders with shame and whispers that giving up is the only honest choice. The other, more tender but no less insistent, urges, "You're not broken, you just need a pause." It tells you that surrender is not synonymous with defeat, that perhaps for the first time you could let yourself feel rather than fix. Yet you choke on that possibility because you've been taught that feeling your pain is the last thing you should do. I know you're tired of pretending. You're tired of glossing over the ache with another gratitude list or forcing a smile for the cameras. And that exhaustion, that raw, unfiltered fatigue, is precisely where our journey begins. There is something liberating in admitting, I don't have it all figured out. I don't want to. I'm scared, and yet I'm curious about what lies beneath the fear. Imagine for a moment releasing the burden of rightness. Imagine laying down the sword of self-judgment and allowing yourself to be a work in progress. Not because you failed at being perfect, but because perfection was never designed for you. You were designed to live in full spectrum, shadows and all. This is the point where most people click away, unsettled by the notion that clarity comes not from stacking achievement upon achievement, but from meeting yourself where you are. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your truth, your fiercely held certainties, aren't always reality, and why recognizing that discrepancy is not weakness, but the first step toward your own freedom. You've been sold the idea that truth is a single, shining beacon, coldly rational, indisputable, universal. They tell you that if you just gather enough facts, chart your path with logic, and apply every tried and true method, you'll arrive at clarity. But here's the brutal reality. Sometimes, logic only sharpens the blade of your pain. You pore over textbooks on stoicism and neuroscience, you memorize breathing exercises, and still your heart pounds with the same old questions. Why? Because truth isn't always an equation you can solve. Often it's a wound you're refusing to feel. When someone offers you a tidy explanation, your anxiety is caused by X. You simply need to reframe your thoughts, change your mindset. It can feel comforting at first, like a sugar-coated promise of relief, but sugar only masks the bitterness underneath. You swallow those quick fixes and, in the next moment, taste the old ache stronger than ever. The kind of relief that comes from logic is temporary because it skips over the parts of you screaming for recognition. It's one thing to understand the mechanics of suffering. It's another to hold the pain and let it speak its truth. Most psychologists won't tell you this. You're not broken because you lost control, and you won't be healed by control alone. They'll market you programs that claim if you visualize harder, journal longer, or recite affirmations more fervently, you'll finally fit the mold of well-adjusted. But what if that mold was never meant for you? What if chasing these cliches only keeps you tethered to the very patterns you're desperate to escape? The systems designed to help you can instead reinforce the myth that your pain is a problem to be fixed rather than a door to be opened. Truth, in practice, often behaves like a shield. It deflects anything that threatens our carefully constructed self-image. You cling to your version of reality because it protects you from admitting the parts of yourself you fear. The shame, the longing, the rage simmering just below the surface. When you finally face the fact that you've been living behind armor, you'll realize all those solutions were just more plates in front of your face, distracting you from what's really going on beneath. Imagine meeting a person after decades of separation. You might not recognize them at first glance because you've only ever known their public mask. In the same way, you've been a stranger to yourself. You've interpreted your choices through filters of fear and defense, convinced that your perspective was the sole authority on what's real. But perspective is limited. It only captures one angle of a multifaceted experience. There's a richness beyond your current vantage point, waiting for you to turn and explore. This isn't about discarding logic entirely. Reason has its place, but it's about understanding that true insight often arrives not from dissecting your thoughts, but from embracing the totality of your experience. The ache in your chest, the tremor in your voice, the way your body tightens when you think you failed. These are the coordinates of your inner map, and you can't chart them with a ruler. If this feels uncomfortable, if it sounds harsh to say that your truth might be a defense mechanism, then you're touching something vital. It's a sign you're on the brink of shifting from seeing yourself as a problem to witnessing yourself as a complex, wounded being worthy of compassion. You're not delusional or weak. You're simply looking through a lens cracked by unhealed pain. Here's the key insight. You're not mistaken. You're wounded. Until you recognize that your convictions may be filtered through old scars, you'll keep spinning in circles, mistaking armor for identity. Real clarity arises when you pause, lower your guard, and peer behind your own defenses. Only then can you start to see your life from a whole new angle and discover that the freedom you've been yearning for begins with daring to stand in the light of your own brokenness. If what I'm saying hits you in the chest, subscribe to the channel. Let this truth reach those who've spent too long hiding from their own shadows. If you recognize the weight of trying to be right all the time, hit that button now, because every click helps someone else hear the voice they've been silencing. If you feel that tug inside, urging you to stop running from yourself, subscribe and join the journey towards seeing life from a whole new angle. Let's make sure this honesty finds everyone who's ready to face their pain and discover the freedom on the other side. You've spent your life convinced that your perspective is the whole picture. What you see through your own eyes must be reality. Yet, nearly every one of us carries a point of view shaped by forces far beyond our conscious choice. From the moment you learned to speak, you were apprenticed into your culture's story. What counts as success? What emotions are respectable? Which parts of yourself you must hide? Your earliest wounds, when a parent's glance faltered or a teacher's reprimand stung, etched patterns into your psyche. Those small moments of rejection whispered that certain feelings, desires, or ideas were too dangerous to bring into the light. Imagine trauma not just as a single event, but as the ink that stains the lens through which you view every subsequent moment. That scraped knee on the playground becomes more than a bruise. It becomes proof that the world is unsafe. A sibling's teasing isn't wasted noise. It becomes evidence that you're unworthy. Over time, these layers accumulate like sediment, and you construct your point of view on this foundation of old pain. Without noticing, you start to believe that lens is reality itself, rather than a filter born of survival. Carl Jung called this hidden terrain the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny until they're projected onto others. We identify with our strengths, our competence, our kindness, our self-control. Yet we reject what feels unacceptable: anger, envy, vulnerability. We paint ourselves as the hero and relegate the villain, the darker impulses, to the shadow. But what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves, we inevitably see in those around us. The boss who micromanages becomes a symbol of your own fear of failure. The friend who abandons you becomes a mirror of the part of you that flees conflict. Your mind erects these projections to keep the disowned fragments at arm's length. Sigmund Freud taught us that projection is more than metaphor. It's a defense mechanism that literally casts our unwanted feelings onto the world. When you're furious at someone else, there's a chance you've never allowed yourself to feel anger toward yourself. When you judge someone's mistake with relentless harshness, perhaps you cannot bear to face the mistakes you've made. Every time you point a finger, you have 3 pointing back at you. And yet most of us cling to our judgments as though they are shields, never realizing they're actually the echo of a voice within, whispering, "I'm not safe to meet." Then there's the inner critic, a voice refined over years of whispered comparisons, societal demands, and internalized commands. At first, it speaks gently: be better, do more, don't disappoint. But with time, its tone hardens. It becomes the merciless courtroom judge, interrogating every choice. Why did you say that? Why didn't you try harder? Who do you think you are? That voice is often mistaken for your own conscience, but it's usually the echo of a parent's rigidity, a teacher's scorn, or a culture's narrow standards. It's not you, yet it masquerades as your truest self, keeping you locked in achieving, pleasing, and never quite being enough. Here's the paradox that shakes us to our core. Everyone is certain their suffering is objective truth. My anxiety is real. My pain is justified. My burdens are heavier than anyone else's. And in a sense, they are real. Your feelings aren't optional. Yet the stories you build around those feelings are often narratives invented to protect you from deeper hurt. You believe believing in your own righteousness shields you from shame. You think clinging to one fixed perspective secures you against chaos. But by holding so tightly, you miss the wider view that invites healing. When you begin to see that your truth might be more about preservation than discovery, everything shifts. You realize that your convictions, those fierce declarations of right and wrong, have been functioning as armor. They weren't crafted to reveal reality. They were forged to defend you from it. And armor, by its nature, is heavy, restrictive, and corrosive over time. This doesn't mean abandoning logic or discarding the legitimate facts you've gathered. Rational thought has its place. It helps you navigate contracts, budget your time, choose a career. But when it comes to your inner world, reason alone can't excavate the buried pieces of your soul. You need a willingness to feel the sting of old wounds, to sit with the trembling edges of your being without rushing to a tidy explanation. As you step into that vulnerability, you might discover something terrifying: the possibility that everything you believed about yourself was incomplete, even misleading. Yet, paradoxically, that admission is the seed of freedom. The more you soften around your story, "I thought I was unlovable because my parents were distant," or "I convinced myself I couldn't quit my job because stability was proof of worth," the more light seeps in through the cracks. And here's the loop we've been circling back to. By recognizing that your perspective has been marred by old scars, you open a portal to new angles. You can tilt your head, peer from different heights, and see the facets of your life you've never noticed. You might realize that the colleague you resented is wrestling with their own shame, or that the failures you despise contain the blueprint for your greatest growth. But there's something even more frightening than that revelation, and that's what comes next. You've carried your convictions like armor for so long that you've convinced yourself you were simply standing firm, never realizing you were boxed in by the very thing you clung to. In truth, you're not mistaken. You're incomplete. You've never seen the whole mosaic because you've only ever viewed it through a single, crackling shard of glass. And that shard, however familiar, distorts the picture. Imagine standing before a sunset but squinting through a narrow keyhole. You'd swear the sky ended at the frame's edge and anything beyond was darkness. Yet if you stepped back, you'd discover horizons you never knew existed, colors deepening into violet, clouds dancing in patterns you'd forgotten to look for. In the same way, your truths have been glimpses, not panoramas. You've believed in their infallibility because they were all you had, but what you've mistaken for certainty was really survival instinct, your psyche's way of keeping you safe from feeling lost. Acknowledging that is not weakness, it is quiet revolution. In the hollow between your ribs, there's a stillness longing for permission to exist without pretense, to recognize that you don't have to fight every battle, justify every choice, or defend every emotion. That is to tap into a reservoir of strength you've spent years denying. Silence can be a fortress, not a prison, if you let it cradle the raw edges of your being rather than slam guardrails around them. You don't have to be right to be real. Say it out loud, even if only to yourself in a dimly lit room. Feel how those words catch in your throat because they threaten the very foundation of the walls you've built. You've mistaken being unshakable for being unbreakable. You've thought that wavering meant defeat, so you've refused to waver. But rigidity cracks, flexibility endures. Why do we cling to our limited truths, even when they burn us from the inside? Because they're familiar. They're the echoes of every person who taught us how to feel safe. We learned that doubt was shameful, confusion a failure. So instead of admitting we didn't know, we doubled down, shouting our half-truths until the noise drowned out the smallest whisper of uncertainty. If I admit I'm wrong, we feared, I admit I'm worthless. That belief hid so well you never questioned its power. But here's the unvarnished core. Error is not an indictment of your value. It's the echo of your courage. To be wrong is to be alive, exploring territories where you have not dared to tread. Every misstep has been a step towards something your armor could never touch, a deeper understanding of who you are when the momentum falls away. In those silent failures, you encountered your raw edges, insecurity, vulnerability, desire, and you labeled them dangerous rather than portals to authenticity. Think of how brilliant a diamond becomes only after enduring immense pressure and deep, dark heat. Your pain has carved facets into your soul, and yes, it hurt. But without the cut, the polished brilliance cannot emerge. Your deepest wounds carry the promise of brilliance if you'll let them. Each time you forgive yourself for seeing only a fragment, you widen the aperture to life's vastness. Now, as you stand at the rim of a new understanding, you might feel dizzy. Good. Let the vertigo remind you that you're shifting perspective. You're stepping away from the conviction that your rightness was ever the point. The real victory lies in becoming whole, in welcoming the full spectrum of your experience, light and dark, certainty and question. And so, here at the climax of this revelation, you face an unguarded moment to lay down the sword of rightness and pick up the torch of curiosity. You're not here to prove you were right, you're here to prove you're alive. This This trembling at the edge of your old lens is where true strength gathers. And from here, you'll discover angles you never imagined, truths that defy your expectations, and a freedom that begins when you accept you never needed to be perfect, only honest. Begin by learning to witness your inner turmoil without immediate judgment. When a storm of competing thoughts rises, one part of you demanding validation, another crying out in shame, pause. Simply name what's happening. You might say inwardly, "Here's the part of me that insists on being right," or "Here's the part that feels overlooked." Don't rush to correct or push away these voices. Imagine their children pounding at your door, each with their own suitcase of fear and longing. Let them speak their piece before you decide what to do next. Next, try this simple yet profound exercise. Catch the exact moment you feel compelled to prove yourself right, whether in a conversation, an email, or a private thought. Freeze. Take a slow breath. Then ask yourself, who inside me needs this so desperately? Notice the answer that bubbles up. You may sense a younger self, still wounded by past disregard, or a part of you terrified of being abandoned if you admit error. By naming that hidden passenger, you shift from battling opponents to comforting an ally. To deepen this work, practice the triple gaze technique. Find a quiet place and reflect on a troubling situation through 3 lenses. Your present view, describe what you see now, unfiltered. I feel attacked. I'm certain they're wrong. I'm bracing for criticism. The wound's view, imagine looking through the lens of your past pain. From the scar of my childhood, every critique feels like rejection. I learned that admitting fault meant danger. Notice the patterns. The compassionate view. Finally, adopt the gaze of a kind friend. I see you, trembling under the pressure. I acknowledge how hard it is to risk being wrong. I honor your courage for even noticing this. Spend a few minutes in each perspective, long enough to feel the shift. You'll uncover how your story moves from stiffness and shame into a space of gentle curiosity. Lastly, introduce a low-pressure journaling practice. Keep a notebook or a digital file titled, "Maybe I'm Seeing from the Wrong Angle." Each time you catch yourself stuck in certainty, write a brief entry, not to prove something right, but to explore possibilities. One day, your note might read, "I insisted my partner was ignoring me, but perhaps they were battling their own overwhelm." Another might say, "I felt shame at my mistake, but maybe it's a sign I'm stretching beyond my comfort zone." There's no need to resolve these entries. Their purpose is to broaden your field of view, not to pinpoint a single correct answer. Over weeks, you'll notice a subtle unfolding. The rigid lines of right and wrong will soften. You'll find moments of spaciousness in your mind where questions can hover without collapsing into self-criticism. And with each act of witnessing, questioning, and exploring, you'll grow more fluent in the language of your own psyche, learning to navigate not from armor, but from a place of integrated strength. But remain alert. These tools can feel unsettling at first, as if you're dismantling the very ground beneath your feet. That discomfort is a sign you're moving into uncharted territory. Lean into it. In the next section, we'll test the sharpest edge of this work, facing the final, most searing paradox that waits beyond integration. Now, as we draw this journey to a close, I invite you to one final act of honesty, not for the sake of being right, but for the sake of being whole. Notice the impulse to defend your version of events, to hold fast to every conviction as though it defines your worth. That impulse is born of pain, not of your true self. Your genuine voice speaks softly beneath the clamor of defenses, yearning for a chance to be heard without judgment. Remember, not every thought you claim as truth emerges from your authentic core. Many are echoes of old wounds, reverberations of moments when you felt unsafe, unseen, or unworthy. Those beliefs shaped your perspective, but they no longer serve you. Letting go of them isn't a sign of weakness. It's an act of profound integrity. If you recognized yourself in these words, write in the comments, "I no longer run from pain." Let's see how many of us are willing to step into this circle of honesty together. Your comment isn't just a declaration. It's a beacon to others trapped behind their own defenses, a signal that it's safe to lower the shields at last. This is only the beginning. There's still something waiting to overturn everything you thought you knew, something that will expand your vision far beyond the limits of right and wrong. Stay with me and prepare to discover the secret that lies on the other side of every shattered certainty.